Hi, I am Melissa, and I am an alcoholic and a recovering addict. And this is step 12. We have made it to the end, right? Out of the Life Recovery Workbook. If you've made it this far, I'm very proud of you. It is a goal accomplished, right? Well, it's a daily thing. We have to work this program every day. So I'm going to do this out of the workbook. Okay. It says under profile, Pauline was facing the fact that her marriage was over and that divorce was inevitable. Her pain and depression were excruciating. To stay out of her addictive behavior, she worked closely with her sponsor to apply all 12 steps as she navigated the process. In step 1, she admitted she was powerless over her husband's behaviors and choices, acknowledged that she could not change him, and accepted that that when she tried to do so, her life and emotions became unmanageable. In step 2, Pauline came to believe that God could restore her to sanity around her desires to control and change her husband and the inevitability of divorce. In step 3, she turned her will over to God in this situation, as well as her husband, her life, and the effects of the divorce on her children, trusting that in His sovereignty, God would care for all of them. Step 4, her sponsor directed Pauline to write out her resentments about her husband and her own participation in the marital situations that led to the divorce. She also wrote out her fears of leaving the marriage and the effects on her children. In the process of writing this inventory assignment, Pauline was able to release the pent up feelings and they seemed more manageable. Together, they identified the exact nature of her wrongs and the character defects that were causing her resentments and fears. For step 5, Pauline made an appointment with her sponsor to share her feelings, writings, and insights. Together, they identified the exact nature of her wrongs and the character defects that were the basis for her resentments and fears. She still had many feelings of grief and sadness over the circumstances to process and live out, but with new knowledge of her own part, she felt empowered to move forward in peace. She felt encouraged to change the things she could not. For step 6, Pauline had become entirely ready to have her defects of control, resentment, and feared selfishness removed as she recognized that they were keeping her from being emotionally free and spiritually available for service to God. Step 7 was a practical prayer, or I'm sorry, I can't read. Oh my goodness, I do this all the time. Step 7 was a prayer step of asking God to remove these defects that kept her from doing God's will. She humbly asked Him to be free of resentments, fear, and selfishness around her relationship with her husband, even through the divorce process. In step 8, Pauline decided to see the effects of her own attitudes and behaviors on her marriage and how she had harmed her husband with her attempts to control him through criticism, judgment, and nagging. This was difficult to look at when she was feeling like a victim and very hurt by the process of divorce, so it took time and prayer to become willing to make amends to him. For step 9, making amends would mostly have to be living amends. Pauline had to stay out of her husband's life, avoid controlling him or judging his behavior, even from afar, and change her communications with him when discussing issues regarding the children. Step 10 would be to continue to inventory her thought life and identify when she was slipping into self pity, fear, judgment, and resentments. Pauline would admit these failings through journaling and sharing with her sponsor and speak directly to the person harmed when necessary. This would be very important to keeping your emotional balance during the divorce process. Staying in spiritual balance, step 11, seeking God through prayer and meditation for His will and power to carry it out, became a non negotiable time for her each day. She needed time to pray to be in God's will with no requests, just resting in His presence and was very healing for Pauline. She felt closer to God despite the emotional pain from the changes in her life. As she worked all these steps in order, she was awakened to God's presence in all in all of life. She sensed his presence and will in everyday activities, and she was able to live out the principles of honesty, responsibility, and compassion. Pauline's objective was now to share the spiritual way of life with others, such as those she sponsored, co workers, and church members. This reinforced the spiritual and emotional lessons she was learning. In the sharing, her gratitude for all that God was doing in her life increased, even though she would never have chosen divorce as an option. By working these steps, Pauline discovered that she could experience the joy of living even in the midst of a painful reality. This recovery, this is recovery, living in reality. So, step 12 is having a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs. There are three parts to step 12: the affirmation of our spiritual awakening, carrying the message of that awakening, and participating or practicing these principles in our entire life. By working diligently on the first 11 steps, we have acquired a healthier view of ourselves, others, and God. This has enabled us to live free of the bondage of our addiction on a more consistent and contented basis. If we previously believed in God, we have achieved a greater level of surrender, humility, and serenity than we ever imagined. Allowing the Lord Jesus to free us from the burden and compulsion of addiction takes a measure of faith and humility that is challenging even to experienced Christians. The addiction has painfully exposed a new page. Human limitations, frailties, and absolute inability to save ourselves. The addictive self has only one focus: the next drink, the next fix, the next bite, the next hit. Recovery through the first 11 steps teaches us to surrender that addictive will and bring it into line with God's will, which yields freedom from captivity. Now we embark on working the second part of 12 step. The step I'm going to start that sentence over. Now we embark on and working the second part of step 12, carrying the message. After living in spiritual poverty of addiction, alcoholics and addicts of all types are able to live a full life in relationship with God and others. This good news is too wonderful to keep hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house, says Jesus in Matthew 5:15. An amazing expansion of our maturity and recovery occurs as we share our experience, strength, and hope with others. We keep it alive in us as we share compassionately with fellow strugglers. It becomes our spiritual mission to share the message of recovery and liberation with captive addicts. Freed from the tyranny of addiction by working the 12 steps, we have a new outlook on life and a deeper connection with God's Spirit. Working step 12 means that we must be ready to share with anyone at any moment about recovery from addiction. This does two things for us. First, we must tell our story to another person about what we were like in addiction, what happened to convince us to seek recovery, and what we are like now that we are released from addiction by working the 12 steps. By reminding ourselves of the path we have traveled, we keep denial from creeping into our thoughts and leading us to relapse. Second, our humility and compassion develop as we share. Admitting to another that we are recovering from addiction takes humility and courage to risk being rebuffed. Yet we know where the other is, emotionally and spiritually. Our sharing can be powerful help to others. Taking on this responsibility to carry the message brings a measure of maturity. The third part of step 12 is practicing these principles in all our affairs. Practicing these principles involves the continual application of all 12 steps to our life circumstances. Let's review the principles we have been experiencing through working the 12 steps. 1, we recognize our powerlessness and our unmanageability of our daily lives. God removes our insanity. Step 2, God removes our insanity and restores wholeness. Step 3, we surrender to God and let go of control. Steps 4 and 5, We make an honest inventory of ourselves, not others, and share our confession with another person. Steps 6 and 7, in humility, we seek help from God to cleanse us and fill us with new strengths. Steps 8 and 9, we recognize the harm we've caused to others and take action to heal our damaged relationships. Step 10, we persevere in the training of the 12 steps in daily life. Step 11, consciousness of God's presence is with us always. Step 12, we give away what we have gained in our journey through these steps and remain in recovery in every life encounter. Remaining in recovery is similar to what Jesus said to his disciples in John 15:5. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For part of me, you can do nothing. From me, you can do nothing. We cannot practice these principles of 12 steps without being connected to Him. So, our priority is to apply these steps in any problem, event, situation, job, or relationship. In other words, through anything that life throws at us, when we connect to Jesus by deepening our conscious contact, He enables us to live more effectively, responsibly, and joyously. As we maintain our sobriety and persistent in recovery, by working the 12 steps, we find benefits that were not obtainable before the midst of our addictive behaviors and substances. Our lives may have seemed to wander meaninglessly, but now they are filled with the purpose and direction. We learn that we can be content with the conditions set before us. We learn that we can accept and handle tragedy and stress and serenity and courage. We learn to appropriately connect to our loved ones and seek to live well with everyone we encounter, meeting with them compassion, grace, and acceptance. We learn that our relationship with God is the key to all of these tremendous gifts of recovery, and that an attitude of gratitude is the salve for an irritability or other emotional disturbance. We begin to see that the basis of life is partnership with God and people. Our short-sighted purposes for our lives begin to fade as we realize that with God's help, we can conquer our fatal addiction. The miracle of this partnership with God is so awe-inspiring that we encourage to continue recovering no matter how arduous it may be. We realize that material worldly success pales in comparison to living vitally and purposely. The book titled The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous states, true ambition is not what we thought it was. True ambition is the deep desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. All right, and the questions for 12 steps, or for step 12 is, all right, this is under our mission, and it's Isaiah 61, 1 through 3. How have I passed through the pain and despair of enslavement to addiction and moved into healing and freedom? Having had a spiritual awakening after being set free from my addiction, am I excited or hesitant for my experience, strength, and hope with others who are struggling with addiction? If so, why? And this one is under our story, Mark 16, 14 through 18. Describe the story of your spiritual awakening and how the first 11 steps have brought spiritual principles, truths, and healing into your life. Describe what you were like, what happened, and what you are like now. Okay. I couldn't fit that whole question in there. All right. And this one is under sharing together, and that's John 15, 5 through 5. Am I connected to the vine? And how do the 12 steps help me to remain in Him? Is my recovery attractive to other addictive, compulsive people because I am becoming more loving rather than condemning those who need my help? And I think that that is an important one. That's why I always say I never forget where I came from. And that is because my addiction put my personality in a really low place. So I have to remember that those people that are like that now need help just like I did. And I didn't want people looking down their nose at me at that time. So, you can't condemn people for living the same way that you used to live, and they need help just as much. What am I doing to reach out with Jesus's love? I will say that this is my way, well, one of my few ways of reaching out to help people. And, this is 12 step for me, or step 12 for, why do I keep saying it backwards? Um, but, this is the step 12 for me. This is me helping carry these principles in all my affairs and carrying it on to, helping the next person that still suffers. Some people suffer in their homes quietly and they never go out to get help. And I hope that this reaches that person, and I hope that it helps you. I really do. These questions, these three are under listening first. And this is based on Acts 8:26-40. What is my attitude about sharing my story of recovery? Am I reluctant to tell my story, or am I the type that wants to share too much too soon with too many people? I think that there's no perfect way to do step 12. Okay. My first 90 days of sobriety, I was in Anna Branch telling the women my story. And the people that worked there that watched me tell my story, I mean, I really had in tears. But I will tell you, this is what I tell any girl that I sponsor. I tell them, when you first get sober, write out your story, because and do it before you do your steps, because I promise you, after you do your, and then in a year, read it, because your perspective is going to change drastically. Because in our first, year of recovery, I want to say that we live in a victimhood mentality. We don't yet see the things that we took part in. We don't see that, you know, the the actions that put us in the situations to be a victim in the first place was our fault. We don't see that. So I strongly encourage you to write your story, keep a journal. That will also help you. That's been one of the things I've kept journals since I got sober. I've got stacks of books that I've written in. I just couldn't imagine. I haven't read them, but I could only imagine how they look like to me now. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm probably going to do that this week as I take a break from social media. Okay, and the next question is from either extreme. Am I willing to wait for God's timing for sharing my recovery? Do I see my story as valuable to God's plan? If so, describe how. Um, to answer the last one, from either extreme, am I willing to wait for God's timing for sharing my recovery? Uh, for me, waiting to tell my story on here, I wanted to get the 12 steps out of the way first. And I kind of shared bits and pieces. But as for, actually telling your story, I think, like I said, the first 90 days that I was in recovery, I was in Anna Branch. I told my story, and I don't think that you have to wait. Um, and I feel like God wants you to share your story with people that are in recovery as well. Women, I have I've told my story online with men, but I've told my story to women. That's when I go to in person or whatever. I have told my in person story to women. I and I do that because women understand other women, more than men understanding us. Okay, they understand us when it's convenient for them, and I'm not like being sexist, but I'm being sexist because that's just reality. If I go in there and say, okay, these are the things that I did as a woman, for drugs or whatever, a man is not going to look at you as another woman will. Another woman in recovery is going to be like, I can sympathize, you know? And if they can't sympathize, they're not judging you because they've done things that I haven't done, and I'm not judging them. It's like a judge free zone. Like, what is that, Planet Fitness that says that? Judge free zone. And, but all right, so do I see my story as valuable to God's plan? I think that, like I had said in previous videos, that I think our stories are valuable because our stories shape our character of what we are like now. It's whether you learn from your story, that's the important part. The next three questions are under talking the walk. Talking the walk. So yeah. All right. Anyways, and that's under 1 Timothy 4 and 14 through 16. Paul encourages Timothy. I just cannot say that name right if I wanted to. Paul encourages Timothy to throw yourself into the task so that everyone will see your progress. I won't be able to fit all that onto one. So, what changes in my life can others observe since I have been sober and working the 12 steps? Paul wanted Timothy not only to teach others, but to be an example. When I share my story with others, am I preaching or sharing my experience, strength, and hope? Am I able to let the other person make his or her own decisions by relinquishing control and letting God do his work? All right, so that last question, am I able to let other person make their own decisions? That in the 12th step, right? If you're going to be a sponsor, it is very important to know a difference between telling somebody what to do and offering some things. All right, so I have learned a couple lessons in sponsorship that I have been too pushy, and then I've learned from it. I've changed that, and you cannot tell somebody, hey, this is how you have to do it, because if you tell them that they have to do it this way, then they are not going to do it that way. That's why it says in this program of action that it is suggested. These are these steps suggested as a spiritual program or as a program of action. Okay. So everything is a suggestion, or maybe, just and try to let them figure it out on their own, because so people want what they can't have. Okay. Until they get it, then they don't want it anymore. If it is given freely and we do not have to work for it, then we do not appreciate it. Rules of a woman right there. That is, yeah, it's a woman thing, I promise. But I also feel like that's also a man thing, but you had to figure things out on your own. You had to find your own groove on how to sponsor, on how to tell your story. Like, I have one story, but when I tell it to, uh, so like I was saying, when I told it online in front of men, I told my story in a different perspective, where it wasn't so only understandable for women. And when I go into a treatment center, I will uh, I will put emphasis on my strength and hope more than my experience. For my home group, I will tell my entire story, and have no problem with my experience being shared. If there was men there, I would probably focus more on like the nutshell of my experience. I would probably focus mainly on my strength and a lot of my hope. You know what I mean? But everybody has their own way of doing things. You have to fill your crowd, and that's why a lot of people like my stepdad. He's also an AA. He's 25 years sober. Yay. Um, he always says that, because I was like, you don't have any notes or anything, and he's like, no, I pray about it, and then I go in and God tells me how to tell my story. You know, use me as a vessel. You know, because there may be somebody, you can't script it. All right. I mean, I have a bad memory, so I'll bring my timeline with me and I will have it in front of me, so that way I know not, and I'm a jumper. Like, I will jump from my first year of use to today and go back to my third year of use. And then my story will make no sense. So, like, I don't script it, but I got to write some things down, but the fact that he taught me, pray before you go. All right. And you go over your testimony in your mind, or you can even say it out loud, in a prayer, speak it to God. That's okay too. And then when you go in, you give your lead. And then afterwards, most people are going to love hearing your story. Even if they cannot relate to it, it takes a lot of courage to get up in front of a bunch of people uh, and tell your most vulnerable truth. And I commend you for doing it. And then carrying the message to the next person that still suffers. It's important. You can't keep what you don't give away, or you can't, if you don't give it away, you can't keep it. All right. So I suggest sponsorship. I do. I recommend. It keeps me sober. It's very healing to me in my recovery. I promise you. Okay. Plus, it makes me not forget where I came from. Okay. So next one question is never forget. Well, that's funny. That's the next question. All right. Uh, what do I remember about my last drink or my last binge? And describe that time, including actions, feelings, behaviors, and thoughts that led up to it and followed it. So, all right. So for me, I was about, I don't know, I was about a year and a half sober, and I had been, and like I said, I changed my people, places, and things. So drugs were not around me because I was only around sober people. And I had moved to the city where I live now, uh, still new grounds for me. And I had just got my car, and I got off work. I was working at the treatment center at the time, and I got off at 12 o'clock, 12:30. And I got home, and Lord behold, there was drugs there. And I thought, well, I have all this clean time, but it had not been around me, and that temptation was there. So I took 2 hits off of this, and I had a heart attack, and I died for 4 minutes. And that's what, so I guess my moral of my story there is, when we are so far into recovery, some of us are like, you know, I made it 90 days. I I think I can have a drink, right? You know, no, you can't. you may be able to at that time, and that phenomenon of craving that they call it, it may not even come back for a few days, a couple weeks maybe, but it's going to knock on your door. And I've seen and heard so many people that have been in recovery, have so much clean time, go out, and just like me, you know, I died 4 minutes, and I'm lucky to be sitting here. So, and then what followed it, you're seeing it. I I I am not tempted anymore. That scared me to death. No pun intended. But I got lucky because I've always had to have something drastic happen in order to change me. And that's just the nature of my beast, my addiction. I didn't want to quit drinking until, and I was physically addicted to alcohol. If I didn't have it, I was shaking and my heart was pounding. And the day after was just so horrible, but I had to go straight to a drink or I couldn't function. And that went on for years for me. Um, if I hadn't woke up in jail, jail saved my life. Robbing that bank saved my life. And I know that sounds stupid, but I wouldn't have quit drinking. I just wouldn't have because I physically couldn't. So, and then when I was like, okay, well, if I can't drink, I got to do something else. So, anyways, I'm not trying to give my whole story right here because my next video is my story. But, you know, I had to have a drastic experience to change me. So, I am lucky that I was able to have that experience. That way, I don't have that in my mind going, you know, you could go back to Indianapolis if I have a bad day, I could just, but no, I can't because I know for a fact I will die. And it's been facts that once your system is clean from all them toxins, I mean, years can go by and you are still an addict and you're still an alcoholic. You are still in recovery. We cannot be confused about this. Okay. All right. So the next 3 questions, okay, is under the narrow road. Say that 3 times real fast. And that's under 1 Peter 4, 1 through 4. Peter pointed out, you have had enough in the past of the evil things and godless people enjoy. Their immortality, delete that. Their morality and lust, their feasting and drunkenness and wild parties. I had to make this 2 parts because it's okay. What was so painful about my addiction that I became willing to suffer for Christ? The pains of recovery. Okay. Well, I don't need to answer that. I think I just did, right? Does the approval or judgment of others keep me from sharing recovery? And do I fear negative rumors? I will answer that. There is nothing about a rumor that can be worse than the way I was living. And the I read this book. It's called The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Mel Robbins, right? And it's I can't control what others say, and nor do I care. And a hard truth, it's none of my business what people say about me. Okay. And once you start thinking that way, I mean, it's very freeing because I used to always worry, well, what does this person think about me? I don't care anymore. I don't. Unless it's God and you can control my salvation and my faith, I I don't care what people think about me anymore because I know I've lived my worst life. and there's nothing I'm doing now that's like it was. So your opinion of me cannot be worse than the opinions of others in my past. So there's that part, right? All right. The next one is, how can I work the 12 steps on this fear? Well, I mean, you put, all right, so when you're looking at your steps, you just replace your addiction with the word fear. So uh, I am powerless over my fears, and it's making my mental stability unmanageable. And you practice the fears with the recovery, with the recovery workbook, because this is not just for drugs and alcohol. This is for mental health and the way we think. I mean, it is definitely for that. All right, so we are at the end, and it says, concluding thoughts. Our temptation now is to think that we have finished the 12 steps. The reality is that the 12 steps are now really never really done, because we never quit growing emotionally or spiritually. By practicing the 12 steps, we have a path for life and connection with God that yields greater humility and reverence for His grace and power. You never have to wonder how to carry this message of transformation to others. It happens when you integrate the 12-step principles into every area of your life. You don't have to loudly proclaim this message. Your changed life speaks for itself. Attending weekly meetings and working the steps are only meaningful if they result in a remarkable life that is noticeably different than before. Without the same destructive habits and patterns, the message is carried further and better by a kind tongue than by articulate lips. So carry the message of hope and transformation as you love others with all you have and all you are. We conclude with this blessing and encouragement from Peter. It says, may God give you more and more grace and peace as you grow in your knowledge of God and Jesus our Lord. By His divine power, God has given us everything we need for daily living a day. Gosh darn it. God has given us everything we need for living a godly life. We have received all of this by coming to know Him, the one who called us to Himself by means of His marvelous glory and excellence. And because of His glory and excellence, He has given us great and precious promises. These are the promises that enable you to share His divine nature and escape the world's corruption caused by human desires. In view of his life, uh, in view of all this, make every effort to respond to God's promises. Supplement your faith with generous provision of moral excellence, and moral excellence with knowledge, and knowledge with self-control, and self-control with patience and patient endurance, and patient endurance with godliness, and godliness with brotherly love, brotherly affection, and love for everyone. And that's 2 Peter 1, 2 through 7. Prayer for recovery. Let me focus my will today and on my eagerness to do the will of God through working the 12 steps and not to chase evil desires, addiction. Okay, that is the end. My next video will be my testimony, and I hope that it helps someone. I don't know. I am so glad that we have made it this far. I'm proud of you. And I can't, and I would love to hear your testimonies. So I will, in my link where I do my testimony, I will give you a way to share your testimony with me. I'm going to figure out how to do that. But I would love to hear them all. So thank you for watching and completing these 12 steps with me. Have a wonderful day.